The year was 1887. Boston was alive with horse-drawn carriages clattering against cobblestone streets, gas lamps flickering against the fog, and whispers of a new age of invention. But in one forgotten corner of the city, inside a creaking Victorian home, history hid something much darker. Clara Winslow, a 17-year-old maid who worked for the widow Margaret Holloway, had been ordered to clean the attic. Dust coated every trunk and cobwebs stretched across forgotten furniture. She sneezed as she pulled open an old cedar chest, expecting linens or moth-eaten coats. Instead, she found a box. It was made of dark wood, its brass latch tarnished but intact. Curiosity tugged at her. She opened it and froze. Inside lay a photograph, carefully wrapped in yellowed cloth. It showed a boy, no older than 12, dressed neatly in a suit, his hair combed to perfection. His eyes were closed, his lips faintly parted, his small hands folded as if in prayer. He looked peaceful, too peaceful. But something about the image chilled her to the bone. The stillness was unnatural, like time itself had been halted. On the back of the photograph were words, scrawled with a trembling hand. The boy who was preserved. Clara brought the photo to her employer, Margaret Holloway, a frail woman in her late 30s who always wore black. Margaret's gray eyes widened the moment she saw it. She clutched the picture to her chest as if Clara had nearly stolen a piece of her soul. "That's my son, my Samuel," she whispered. Margaret explained, her voice trembling, that Samuel had died months earlier. He had been her only child, her only light since her husband's death years before. "I could not bury him," she confessed, tears pooling in her eyes. "I could not let go. And so, I found a way." Her words unsettled Clara, but sympathy softened her judgment. She had lost her own little brother to cholera 2 years earlier. She knew grief could twist reason into desperate shapes. But what Margaret said next made Clara's hands tremble. "He is not truly gone. He has been preserved." Clara soon learned who Samuel Holloway had been. He had been a lively boy with sandy blonde hair and a laugh that echoed down the neighborhood streets. He had a habit of collecting marbles, polished stones, and scraps of ribbon, claiming each one held a story. He would sit on the Holloway steps, trading his little treasures with the street children, often giving more than he received. But kindness did not shield him from sickness. In the winter of 1887, scarlet fever swept through Boston, claiming dozens of children. Samuel was among them. His fever burned for days until he slipped into stillness in his mother's arms. For Margaret, who had already buried her husband after a factory accident, Samuel's death was not just the loss of a son. It was the end of her world. At Samuel's deathbed, Margaret was inconsolable. She refused to leave his side, clutching his small hand long after the warmth had left it. It was then that Dr. Edwin Cray entered her life. A local physician known for experimenting with new embalming techniques, he approached her with a strange proposition. "I can help you keep him," he said softly. "Not alive, but preserved, free from decay." He explained that he had been developing a formula, an injection that could keep a body from rotting, holding its likeness almost eternally. "If you cannot bear to let him go to the earth," he said, "you may keep him as he was, sleeping." Margaret, delirious with grief, clung to his words. It felt like an answer to a prayer. Against her better judgment, she agreed. The process began in secret. Samuel's body was treated with chemicals, his skin carefully tended, his clothes pressed as though he were ready for Sunday church. Dr. Cray worked with precision, muttering formulas under his breath. When Margaret saw her son again, she nearly collapsed. He looked alive, his skin pale but untouched by death, his features calm, as though he were resting after play. Margaret's breath caught. "He's still mine. He's still here." At her request, a photographer was summoned. In those days, post-mortem photographs were not uncommon. But what made Samuel's image different was how lifelike he appeared. Unlike the stiff, waxen bodies usually captured, Samuel looked like he might stir at any moment. And so the photograph was taken, the one Clara had discovered. A moment frozen, yet deeply disturbing. The photo spread quietly among friends. Some said it was a work of art, capturing innocence beyond death. Others found it grotesque, accusing Margaret of disturbing God's order. Clara herself was torn. When she looked at Samuel's face, she saw peace, but also something unnatural, like a puppet made too perfect. At night, the image haunted her dreams. She would see Samuel standing at the edge of her bed, smiling faintly, whispering her name. She would wake in cold sweats, the sound of children's laughter fading in her ears. The photograph was beautiful, but it was also wrong. Soon, the Holloway home became the subject of hushed conversations in Boston. Children dared each other to peek through its windows, claiming they saw a boy's shadow pass by. Mothers clutched their children tighter when Margaret walked by. "Witchcraft," some muttered. "Blasphemy," others spat. Margaret didn't care. She kept the photograph close, staring at it for hours as though she could will Samuel's soul to remain near. But grief twisted into obsession. And obsession, Clara began to realize, could invite something darker than sorrow. Clara had grown fond of Margaret despite the strange circumstances, but now the house felt heavier, like sorrow clung to its walls. Sometimes, as she dusted the parlor, Clara would hear Margaret whispering upstairs. At first, she assumed her mistress was praying, but one night, while fetching water, she paused outside the bedroom door. Margaret was speaking in a hushed, urgent tone. "Yes, my darling. Yes, I hear you. Mother is here." Clara's blood ran cold. She forced herself to push the thought aside, blaming grief. But when she swore, she heard a faint laugh, soft, boyish, and impossible. Her resolve crumbled. One stormy night, lightning flashing through the windows, Clara entered Margaret's room without knocking. She froze at the sight. Margaret was kneeling before Samuel's photograph, dozens of candles glowing around it. The air smelled of melted wax and something sour, chemical. Margaret's eyes glistened with fervor. "He listens," Margaret said without turning. Her voice was strange, almost joyous. "When I speak, he listens." Clara wanted to scream, to demand she stop, but instead she whispered, "Mrs. Holloway, he's gone." Margaret turned, her face pale and haunted. "No," she said fiercely. "He's still here. I feel him." The next morning, Dr. Cray visited. He had heard rumors of Margaret's nightly vigils. He sat across from her, his brow furrowed. "Madam, what I gave you was preservation, not resurrection. It is science, not spirit. You must understand, holding on too tightly will destroy you." But Margaret only clutched the photograph closer to her chest, her voice trembling with devotion. "You don't understand, doctor. When I speak, he answers. You preserved his body, but I preserved his soul." Clara, standing silently in the corner, shivered at the words. She realized with growing dread that this was no longer grief. It was something far more dangerous. Clara's unease turned into terror the night she dreamed of Samuel. In the dream, she was standing in the Holloway parlor, the photograph propped on the mantel. Suddenly, Samuel stepped out of the frame, barefoot, pale, but smiling softly. His eyes, closed in the photograph, were open now, a light gray that seemed both kind and sorrowful. "Please," he whispered, his voice gentle as a falling leaf. "Tell Mother to let me rest." Clara gasped awake, drenched in sweat. The house was silent except for the ticking clock. But the dream felt real. Too real. She pressed her hands together and prayed, something she hadn't done in years. The days grew darker in the Holloway house. Margaret stopped eating, pushing away soup and bread with shaking hands. Her hair, once neat and dark, turned wiry and streaked with gray. Her skin grew hollow, her voice thinner. She rarely left her room, keeping the photograph always near. Clara tried to care for her, but Margaret refused help. She muttered to Samuel as though he were present. Sometimes, Clara caught words that chilled her. "Soon, my darling. Soon I'll join you." Clara worried that grief was driving Margaret toward the grave faster than illness ever could. One evening, Clara rushed upstairs after hearing a crash. She found Margaret on the floor, clutching the shattered photograph. The glass had splintered, cutting her hands. Blood trickled down her pale fingers, staining the floor. "He called me," Margaret sobbed, rocking back and forth. "I was reaching for him and I dropped him. I failed him, Clara." Clara knelt, bandaging her hands with trembling fingers. She whispered softly, "You haven't failed him, Mrs. Holloway. He loved you. He would never want you to hurt yourself like this." But Margaret only wept harder, pressing the bloodied fragment of the photo to her chest. Realizing she could not help alone, Clara went to Pastor William, a kindly man who had known Samuel since his Sunday school days. He agreed to visit. Sitting by Margaret's bedside, he spoke with gentle conviction. "Margaret, your boy was a blessing, but he is with God now, in peace. By clinging to this photograph, you hold him in chains, and in binding him, you bind yourself." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "But if I let go, I'll have nothing." Pastor William leaned forward. "You will always have him, in your heart, in your memories, in every kindness you share with others. That is how love survives." For the first time, Margaret did not argue. She only wept quietly into her hands. A week later, under the pastor's guidance, Margaret agreed to a small ceremony. Clara, Pastor William, and two of Margaret's neighbors gathered in the churchyard. The photograph, now repaired but still faintly cracked, was placed in a small wooden box. It was buried beneath a weeping willow, the earth damp and soft from spring rain. Margaret knelt, whispering through tears, "Rest, my sweet boy, rest." Clara held her hand tightly, feeling Margaret's fingers shake. She knew this was not a full healing, but it was the first step. As the group dispersed, the air felt lighter, as though a great weight had been lifted from the house. After the burial, Clara noticed the change immediately. The Holloway house no longer echoed with whispers. The oppressive heaviness seemed to lift from its walls. Even Margaret looked different. Still fragile, but her eyes clearer, less haunted. One morning, she smiled faintly at Clara over tea. "Perhaps he truly is at peace now," she said. Clara smiled back, though a chill lingered in her heart. She wondered if Samuel's spirit had finally found freedom, or if it had simply gone silent. Weeks later, while cleaning the attic again, Clara found something she had missed before. Beneath the cedar chest lay a small sealed envelope. Its paper was brittle, the handwriting childlike. It was addressed to Mother. Clara hesitated, then brought it to Margaret. When Margaret opened it, her trembling fingers revealed Samuel's handwriting. "Dear Mother, if anything ever happens to me, please don't be sad. Remember the stories we read. Heroes don't die. They live in the hearts of those who love them. Promise me you'll be strong. Promise me you'll smile again. I'll always be with you. Love, Samuel." Margaret broke into sobs, clutching the letter to her chest. But this time, her tears were different. They were not desperate. They were cleansing. The letter became Margaret's turning point. She began to eat again, regaining her strength. She started taking walks, feeling the spring air against her skin. Most importantly, she began visiting the local orphanage. The children, ragged and hungry, lit up when she read them stories, often the very tales Samuel had loved. She donated his books and clothes, turning her grief into generosity. Each child's smile reminded her of Samuel's laughter. Each hand she held gave her strength. "I think," she whispered to Clara one evening, "that Samuel wanted me to love others as I loved him. That way he never truly leaves." Months passed. Margaret transformed her sorrow into kindness. She became known throughout the neighborhood as Mother Holloway, a woman who fed, clothed, and comforted the orphaned children of Boston. Clara watched in awe. The woman who had once been broken now glowed with purpose. And yet, Margaret always carried Samuel's letter in her pocket. She would touch it gently, like a heartbeat, whenever she felt weak. "His legacy isn't the photograph," she told Clara one day. "It's the love he left behind. That is what survives." Though the photograph of the boy who was preserved was buried, whispers of it lingered in town for years. Some still called it disturbing. Others spoke of it as a tale of devotion. But for Clara and Margaret, the photograph's true lesson was different. It was not about preservation nor defiance of nature. It was about letting go and about how love, when shared, becomes eternal. Years later, Clara would retell the story of the Holloways, the mother who could not let go, the boy whose letter changed everything, and the photograph that became both a wound and a cure. And each time she finished, listeners sat in silence, reflecting. Because in the end, the most disturbing photo of 1887 was not just a relic of grief. It was a reminder that we must live, even after loss. Samuel Holloway, the boy who was preserved, did not live on in chemicals or in glass or in a faded picture. He lived on in love.